Cairo International Center for Conflict Resolution, Peacekeeping and Peacebuilding, CCPA. And we're delighted to welcome you to this session at PeaceCon 2024 on leveraging African perspectives for sustainable conflict prevention and peacebuilding. Let me start at the outset by thanking the Alliance for Peacebuilding and USIP for convening this very important annual conference that brings the peacebuilding community together, and where we, CCCP, are hosting this session for the very first time. As just as a background to why we wanted to put a spotlight on African perspectives for conflict prevention and peacebuilding. CCCPA is the secretariat of a forum called the ASPON Forum for Sustainable Peace and Development. It's one of the major forums on peace and security in Africa, which has a special focus actually on strengthening conflict prevention and peacebuilding on our continent, bearing in mind Egypt is a strong supporter of peacebuilding, and also in the context of the African Union, Egypt is the champion actually of peacebuilding called post-conflict reconstruction and development. And we're also, since last year, Egypt is delighted to host the new African Union specialized institution in this area, the African Union Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development, whose executive secretary will be among our speakers today. So within its different editions, the ASPON Forum issues a number of conclusions and key messages, and we have the conclusions of the last editions that are now available online on our website. And these conclusions really point on how Africa what can it do more to strengthen its ownership of its peace and security agenda. There's a lot of focus, if you may know, on strengthening African ownership in terms of peace operations, of the growth, the new momentum of deploying AU-led peace operations. But there's also an aspect relating to that also on how our continent can strengthening its ownership of peace-building efforts. I mean, it's the continent with the most conflicts in the world, and we see that the conflicts are becoming more protracted, more complex, lasting longer in time, and also with huge, far-reaching impacts and effects, whether it's humanitarian, economic, at extremely different levels. And I think Somalia is a really important example in this regard, as it's a country that continues to grapple with the terrorist threat to Al-Shabaab, and there's an important peace operation of the African Union there, ATMIS, that is just ended and is being replaced by a new mission, AWESOM, the African Union Mission for Stabilization and Support of Somalia. And we see very clearly from the Somali government side a clear wish to transition out of conflict, but also at the same time, while grappling with current risks and threats, to advance national development efforts, to build state institutions, to strengthen governance, to strengthen economic development. And we had at the ASPON Forum the participation of the Deputy Prime Minister of Somalia, who clearly outlined the ambitious plan of the Somali government to rebuild the state, to strengthen institutions, to expand economic opportunities and growth, as it is on its pathway to tackle the conflict ongoing and the terrorist threats it represents. And I think it's interesting and important to hear this African positive agenda coming forward. And it comes also at a time where the African Union is also strengthening its peace-building framework. Last February, the African Union adopted a revised policy on post-conflict reconstruction and development that becomes now the African Union comprehensive framework for peace-building efforts in Africa. How can we ensure that peace-building interventions, including in Somalia, including the efforts, are in line with this new also policy? What value added does it bring? And how can partners contribute to these efforts and to this new momentum to transition out of conflict and to strengthen efforts to rebuild a strong, viable state and to address the root causes of conflict. We're looking forward to put a spotlight on these issues. And for this purpose, we have a great set of distinguished speakers that have joined us. We're very grateful to their presence.
Morning, afternoon.
With us. I think someone has the mic open if they can close it. And we have both national speakers from Somalia, from the African Union, and from partners of the Aswan Forum. Also, we really appreciate all of them being with us. So I think Hodan Hassan is with us, the Chief Policy Advisor to the President of Somalia. Wonderful to have you. And as I've been saying, I mean, we know that Somalia has ambitious plans in terms of its national development plans to build state institutions and inclusive political process. So if you can help us shed light a bit going further in regarding these plans and the recent developments in terms of strengthening governments, institutions, and local administration in the context of peace building efforts, and how do you see that aligning also with broader developments and efforts by partners internationally to support these efforts? So we'll start with you, followed by Libaki Somatlo, the Executive Secretary of the Post-Conflict Reconstruction of Development Center of the EU. So, Hodan, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Fantastic. Yeah, great. So over to you a bit for around 5-6 minutes on where we are in terms of these ambitious plans on the Somali side. Thank you.
Thanks. First of all, I'd like to thank you, Ambassador Abdelatif, and also thank the Cairo International Center for inviting me to this forum, as well as the organizers of PeaceCon. I think I'm happy to hear that from the forum that took place in Aswan, or the Aswan Forum, that you were able to hear directly from the Deputy Prime Minister. I think in terms of echoing a lot of I think what you'd say is sort of the more positive narrative of Somalia that often doesn't make it into the news. So maybe I'll take a little bit of a time to now outline some of the key developments that have taken place over the last several years, which I think the most significant of which is the recovery of about 900 square kilometers of territory from Al-Shabaab. As many are aware, Al-Shabaab has been a thorn in the side of the government for quite a number of years. It has had quite a lot of territory in the hinterlands, but lately, starting around July of 2022, in a partnership with local communities, the Somali National Forces, being supported by international partners, were able to take over a considerable amount of territory in the central regions of Somalia, which is a really important and strategic area. It composes a lot of the key transportation routes from which Al-Shabaab was earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a day in taxes. So we've been able to get a big money earner away from Shabaab, but more importantly, we're able to recover somewhere in the element of around 60 to 75 communities and towns back into state control. And that is really critical because you really cannot begin to have a strong functional state if part of your territory is not in your control. And so this has been able to minimize Shabaab control in the central regions, and now they remain in parts of 2 other states. So that has been able to contribute to other really critical developments, which of course is the extension of the state into these newly recovered areas, which means that there are now opportunities for investments. So for example, in the community of Adan Yaba, which is on the north of Mogadishu, they were able to, with support from the Somali Ministry of Education and international donors, reopen the high school after more than 12 years of that high school not being functioning. So now you had a high school class of women, of girls and boys who are now back in a formal education system. You have the opening up of internet lines. You have the opening up of these areas to the rest of Somalia, which is really critical. Subsequent to that, then you start to have the extension of the state in the form of police in these areas. You start to have security to be able to hold these territories and open up really critical main supply routes. You also have the beginning of local governance work, right? So starting to think through how you build up local governance in these areas. And that's where the Ministry of Interior with its partners have been able to start looking at how we start doing local developments work. And then even probably more as important is some of the early economic work. So how can you revive livelihoods in these areas and also use that as an opportunity to connect them to other areas? So with the support of donors, of the World Bank, AFDB, UN, you're starting to see investments, stabilization investments in these areas. So everything from lighting to road work to rehab of government institutions. So all of this has really been critical to, having sort of security gains translate into state building and peace building. So you really see that very tangibly in those areas. And ultimately, what we want to see is that once we have more stability in these areas, we can make room for much larger investments. And these are the type of investments that really will open up the economic areas. So a lot of these areas are agricultural areas. They're along the two main rivers in Somalia, the Shabelle and the Juba. And that you can start to imagine what that means for the export of agriculture worldwide. And I think the other question is really, how do the international partners play a role? I think they've already played a role. So we have support from, as I mentioned, the World Bank, African Development Bank, UNDP, and others have been played an important role in key donors in supporting our national reconciliation efforts and our stabilization efforts. There's still a lot of work to be done. I'm not here to say that everything is perfect, but I think the trajectory is in the right place. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadan, so much, and thank you for the overview a bit in terms of highlighting some of the progress that has made again. And we in the Aswan Forum and CCCPA, we're very keen on this positive narrative that comes out of Somalia on progress being made in terms of stabilization, and that's as a precondition to attract investment, to have economic activity, resuming, etc. And that is very good to hear, and we look forward, and we really commend the lead. I think we've seen great leadership in Somalia, which has been critical to this progress. So national leadership has been very important in the recent period in terms of driving this program, this progress, and ensuring it is sustainable in the long term. And maybe we could come back to that on the long-term sustainability of these efforts, because we see that sometimes they're fragile. There's setbacks, etc. So maybe in the follow-up we can reflect more on then the long-term sustainability of these efforts. But again, thank you and congratulations for all this impressive and remarkable work that is being done. Libakiso Matu is the executive secretary of the African Union Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development, which we're very proud to host in Egypt. And as I mentioned, we have a new framework in the African Union, the revised policy for post-conflict reconstruction and development. We will soon be celebrating this PCRD Awareness Week. There's this dedicated week in the African Union also for this, for peace building and its importance. And as this new center is starting to set up its operation, is starting to become more, rolling out its work, I think Somalia is an important country for the efforts of the center. So as we know already, and also many partners are already involved in Somalia and supporting Somalia's peace building efforts. So how do you see that the center you're heading can contribute to these efforts, contribute to Somalia's efforts to transition from conflict to stability and building on the national plans, as well as already interventions by other partners? Over to you, Libakiso.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Abdel Latif, as well as CCCPA, for inviting me to make these interventions. First of all, I want to allude to the fact that the African Union Center for Post-Conflict Reconstruction and Development Center, which is his headquarters here in Cairo, Egypt, is dedicated mostly for fostering sustainable peace and development across Africa. And then, as Ambassador has already mentioned, the center was officially launched in 2021. So I will not go much into the details, but I want to mention that first, over the years, the nature of conflicts and other threats for peace, security, and development in Africa, we are all aware that they have undergone different changes with increase in complexity, frequency, severity, as well as evolution. So this has led to the rethinking of our approach in terms of how do we respond to the conflict and ensure that there's peace building in Africa. So now to answer specifically the question that you have raised, why the policy? What is it that we can learn from the PCRD policy? The PCRD policy is significant in that it highlights the normalization. It is trying to bring into the debate current opportunities that are there to address these conflict issues that are in Africa. So from the onset, it is significant to highlight that normalization of Somalia's relationship with other international financial institutions holds significant potentials for a positive development trajectory. Noting also that currently there has been great progress on the administration of the security sector, focusing on institutional capacity, as well as building reforms aimed at increasing civilian oversight, transparency, and accountability in line with the National Security Architecture Agreement. So what I'm going to do is to provide a snapshot in terms of the 9 thematic pillars of the PCRD policy in how they relate and synergize with the Somalians' interventions. First of all, the first pillar is the pillar on political governance and transition, which most importantly emphasizes on building trust within formal and informal institutions. On the issue of supporting federalism and decentralization, the center sees itself as providing technical assistance to Somalia's federal and regional governments to enhance their governance structures and local governance service delivery. Secondly, is the issue on capacity building for political leaders. Here, we are building efforts in order to train government officials on inclusive governance, electoral processes, as well as political negotiations to foster more stable and political environments. Another factor that is very key on political governance is facilitating dialogue platforms for political stakeholders, including marginalized groups, to ensure broad participation in political transition. The second pillar, which talks of security governance. Here, we will concentrate mostly on the security sector reform, whereby we are going to work with the Somalian security institutions, for instance, to reform the police, the military, intelligence sectors, especially focusing on human rights, compliance, and accountability, as well as transitional justice. In terms of disarmament, demobilization, and reintegration, here the center is going to do a program that will facilitate the DDR programs, which target mostly former combatants, offering them reintegration opportunities through vocational training and livelihood programs. And again, the issue of establishing community-based policing is very key in that it will enhance trust between the citizens and local security forces, especially strengthening public safety. In terms of the socio-economic reconstruction, here we are concentrating on ensuring that we build capacity to ensure that we create jobs, especially local businesses, and through partnership with international donors, financial institutions such as the African Development Bank, and ensure that there's greater participation of women as well as young persons, including as combatants, for instance, to help them to be reintegrated fully into the society. Another key important milestone is the issue of building or rebuilding key infrastructure such as the roads, schools and hospitals, as we are aware that during conflict, this infrastructure is normally destroyed. Therefore, access to school is a problem. For girls and women, issues of mental health as well as maternal mortality, they are important that rebuilding schools and hospitals. In terms of agricultural and livelihood support, the center will provide training capacities as well as providing agricultural tools such as seeds and training to local farmers. This will also include women and young people. The reason being that within the policy, we emphasize more on women inclusion as well as young persons in these issues of peace building. I think another important milestone, which is very important for me to put much emphasis, is the Pillar 5, which talks of women, peace and security. Here, we are mindful of the importance of implementing the UN Security Council 1325 to ensure full and equal meaningful participation of women, including as appropriate through deployment of women as part of African UN-led peace supporters operation. We are going to collaborate with women peace networks in Somalia to establish and support the locally women-led peace networks to ensure that women are included in these processes, such as governance, financial sectors, as well as decision-making. The reason being that amplifying women's voices in peace building is very important. We are aware that women lived experiences and their role in conflict and peace building activities remain largely unrecognized. Another important thing when we talk about women, peace and security is providing gender-sensitive peace-building trainings, which are tailored in such a manner that they will take into account needs and concerns of women in conflict resolution, mediation, negotiation, as well as empowerment processes. Another issue is supporting survivors of gender-based violence who have experienced violence during the conflict. We are also linking this activity to the Sustainable Development Goal number 16, which talks of promoting peaceful and inclusive societies and ensure reduced all forms of violence and abuse. And we are also advocating for strong, effective, and accountable institutions. I think another important pillar is the pillar that is very newly added, the pillar that talks to youth inclusion. Why are we concentrating on youth inclusion? We are aware that youth leadership programs are very wanting at the current moment. So it is important that the center concentrates more efforts and invest in creating leadership development for young Somalis, focusing on peace building, conflict resolution, and civic education. For young people, we are also looking forward to vocational training and employment opportunities, whereby we are going to set up vocational training hubs and centers to offer skills in development in the trade, such as construction, mechanics, as well as technology. We are aware that we are living in the world of industrialization, whereby technology is very key, and we know that young people are the best future for this aspect. Youth peace camps. We are going to organize youth peace camps where young people from different regions and lands can come together to discuss peace and tolerance, and also to learn to coexist with one another. The 8th pillar, which is child protection. We know that Somalia, like most African countries that have emerged from conflict, children have experienced a lot of trauma as well as violence in different areas. Some of them have been integrated as child soldiers. So our program are going to concentrate on establishing reintegration programs for child soldiers, offering psychosocial support, education, as well as vocational training for these children. Another aspect is the issue of education programs for conflict-affected children, whereby we will rebuild and equip schools in conflict zones and provide educational material to ensure that children's right to education is upheld. Here we will also concentrate on both formal and non-formal education programs. Another important aspect is child protection advocacy. Why is this important? Because working with local governments and local governance, civil society organizations and NGO and other partners is very important to strengthening laws and policies that protect children against abuse, exploitation, as well as forced recruitment. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Libakiso. Thank you. I think it was great to hear from you on the different pillars of the policy, because I think not everyone might be familiar with these pillars. So I think it's very good that you outline the pillars and how do the pillars and the support of the PCRD Center through the different pillars to address these issues within also the priorities by the Somali government and the challenging facing Somalia in post-conflict reconstruction development. But obviously, I think these are a lot of very comprehensive plans and comprehensive efforts and very ambitious. So we look forward to see how they will be implemented also in upcoming period. And I just want to mention, I think that the mandate of the new AU mission mentioned specifically the PCRD Center. So you have a great responsibility in that framework also. And we look forward to how these plans that you mentioned will be implemented and will be taken forward. Let me now turn to Dragan Popovic from UNDP Somalia, the portfolio manager of the inclusive policies. And I think this is UNDP, of course, is an important partner of our center, of the ASWAN Forum, of course, and of the Somali government, particularly on inclusive governance and other areas in terms of development, climate change, addressing violent extremism, and it has really its hands in different aspects of the efforts to transition from conflict to stability. But with your focus, Dragan, on particularly the governance aspect and initiatives, how do you see that this we heard the priority given by Somalia to state building, to strengthening institutions. So how are you working on this issue of comprehensive governance reform to avoid relapsing into conflict within broader peace-building efforts in Somalia? Over to you, Dragan. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. It's really a privilege to be part of this group, a group of extremely smart people who really have a strong experience in this area. And at the same time, it's my privilege to be here in Somalia and to contribute to the processes that is happening, and also to contribute to UNDP and UN in all these efforts, supporting the government to lead, to first design Somali-owned and Somali-led process towards inclusive and meaningful institution building and inclusive politics. So I deliberately mentioned context-specific and Somali-led and Somali-owned process. Just linking that to what you said at the very beginning to my colleague Hodan, it's about long-term sustainability. In order to have long-term sustainability, we need to have a context-specific approach. And one of the examples of the context-specific and long-term approach is actually the fact that in 2022, May and June, we had a peaceful transition of power. This is of extreme importance for Somalia, and the fact that Somalia has faced for many decades conflict. This peaceful transition of power has not been only followed by the political actions, which is of course of extreme importance, and political actions actually led on technical part, which is actually continuity from the previous government to the new government in terms of policy frameworks. So I believe for the first time in Somali history in 2022, we did not have that policy frameworks, the building of policy frameworks started afresh. We actually had a new government building on the achievements on the previous government. And this is actually, I believe, a breaking point why we are in this positive trajectory at this point of time. Third element that I would actually mention is absolute recognition by the Somali elite, political elite, that all state building processes must be driven by the active, inclusive, and transparent political dialogue. it's of extreme importance to expand spectrum of constituencies. So actually to go beyond clan elite-based discussions, but actually engage people, particularly focusing at the community level, to amass discussions and inform political decision-making. So actually to establish track 3 approaches as the key entry points for informing track 2 and track 1 high-level decision-making. Then what is actually another key guiding approach is actually that all state-building processes should be taken in complementarity, comprehensively, not to have state-building Olympics, but actually to understand that the electoral process is directly linked to parliamentary assistance and also constitutional reform process. Right now, in Somalia, we are having guidance from the senior political leaders that are gathered in the summit of the Somali leaders that is called National Consultative Council, led by His Excellency President of Somalia, basically agreeing on all state building priorities. And I believe that finally, again, I'm referring to June 2022, which is really a breaking historical point in making sure that all the central government and federal member states have clear agreement on how Somalia should look like and what are the processes that need to be followed in order to basically do this positive trajectory and all these multiple transitions from war to peace, from dysfunctional to functional governance, from humanitarian to development a process. So actually UN's and UNDP's engagement is actually to strengthen this government's approach, particularly focusing on constitutional development, on parliamentary assistance, on electoral engagement, and of course to deal and assist in high-level political facilitation and reaching consensus on the key contentious issues which can be gathered under one specific term, which is actually a federalism process and overall decentralization. However, by supporting government's efforts in those areas, I particularly need to highlight a reconciliation process. Reconciliation process underpins all these processes. Hodan mentioned all these efforts with regards to military campaign and liberating areas, but in these areas now, government needs assistance to establish interim administration leading to formal structures that will feed into the federal framework. So from that perspective, I would like to mention UN's engagement and support to the government with regards to a revision of the overall reconciliation framework in the country, which is called National Reconciliation Framework, which actually recognizes all these elements that I previously mentioned about inclusivity, about positive visions, about reconciliation of the community, but also at the national level, about reconstruction, about conflict management. So all these elements, of course, observed from the perspective of inclusive and meaningful processes, are something that leads and ensures long-term sustainability. But long-term sustainability in a way that all the assistance from the international partners, from the UN, actually responds to the vision of Somalia, to specific context of Somalia, and which is led by the Somalis, not to bring in ready-made solutions, but actually to observe what are the interests and needs of Somalia and Somali people, and from that perspective to provide support. I would stop here because I think that my 5 minutes expired. But of course, Your Excellency and any other colleague can pose follow-up questions, and I'm happy to respond. Over to you, Your Excellency.
Thank you very much, Dragan, and that was really insightful. And I'm very happy you mentioned this transition that happened, the high level one, because it's true. It is something really, really impressive country that is caught in such a conflict dynamic, to have such a political transition at the highest level, and to have then a new vision implemented and policies that are implemented, and how that needs to be rooted in national reconciliation that is Somali owned and led. Actually, maybe one issue that I mean, and we have had opportunity to engage with Somali administration and government stakeholders, and again we see a huge effort being made in the aspect of institution building, I think we see that this is a critical piece, and for example, just to give an example, we had over the Ministry of Climate Change and Environment of Somalia, and she was describing how this is a new ministry, had to be built from scratch. So maybe we can come back on this. Yes, national reconciliation, the political process, but then the institutional building that supports this, that ensures that this is grounded, rooted in strong institutions. I would love to hear a bit more on the work that can be done to support that, because it seems to be really critical also aspect of long-term sustainable peace and development, as we were just mentioning, but maybe we could go back to that. But thank you very much for that. We're going now to Frederick Etefel, Lead Coordinator, Transition States Coordination Office at the African Development Bank. Great to have you with us, Fred. And again, we've had a long-standing partnership with the African Development Bank. And it's really, the African Development Bank is really a key supporter of tackling challenges relating to conflict, transition from conflict to stability, to post-conflict in our region, on peace and security efforts, and particularly on Somalia, it has been very actively engaged through dedicated instruments, efforts, to support reconstruction in Somalia. And I understand that when we were preparing for this meeting, you already mentioned also that the bank is revising its strategy paper for Somalia. So in the current phase, at this very critical phase where Somalia is, how do you see the AFDB's intervention aligning and supporting this drive of economic development, financial reform in Somalia, creating economic opportunity, going hand in hand with institutional building, national reconciliation, building infrastructure, building long-term sustainable peace and development, and I know that the issue of resilience is also very dear to the bank, and I think it's a very important one also here, the resilience of all these efforts, and ensure that they're sustainable on the long term. Over to you, Fred. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, not to you, Ahmed, to the Aswan Forum, to the Alliance for Peacebuilding for inviting us not to this very timely discussion about Somalia. And no, we really see this also as an opportunity to continue to build our partnerships for our engagement in the country, because ultimately, for us, what we believe is that to do things differently compared to the past, we do need to all learn to partner more effectively together, because the transaction costs for the government of humanitarian development, peace building actors acting in fragmentation of each other, counter any effort to build these institutions and achieve synergies. So this is where we really have to make a dedicated effort to break down silos between our communities, and we very much welcome the work that you do in this area to connect the different communities. Now, when it comes to the African Development Bank's engagement and views also and prospects of Somalia, we very much agree with the positive narrative that Hodan has laid out at the beginning of this session. And this is really important. We need to be able to adopt a solutions-oriented, positive narrative for our engagement, and this is also reflected in our approach, where we say we are addressing fragility and building a resilience. A long time ago, we abandoned the concept of fragile states because we realized that this is not something that was actually helpful in framing our engagement to support the countries and people in need. But we have to focus on the opportunities. We have to focus on the sources of resilience. And I think just in addition to some of the positive dimensions that we have heard about security in the country, from our perspective as a development finance institution, a major milestone was when we in 2020 managed to clear Somalia's arrears, because it was only then that we were able to fully engage again, because a country that has fallen into arrears with international financial institutions can no longer tap into the international financial system, and thereby has limited ability to mobilize the necessary capital to invest in its development. And I think now with the recent completion point also there of the HIPC, the Highly Indebted Poor Country Initiative, concerning the debt relief, there is more momentum building up, and this is also why we have now decided to adopt a longer term time frame of our country strategy, which is the usual 5 years. In the past, we would have shorter time frames of about 2 years, but we simply see, and this is also in line with what Dragan has explained, that there is a certain continuity and a certain stability in the country on which we can build, and this is the kind of a virtuous cycle that we need to help reinforce. Now, for us, institution building, in addition to promoting inclusive development and catalyzing the private sector, are really the core areas of our institutional framework for addressing fragility and building resilience. And in the context of Somalia, we are looking very much at the institution building dimension now in line with our comparative advantage, which is on the economic and financial governance side. And I think this is also now just to complement basically the political dimension of governance that Dragan was talking about. So we are helping build the relevant the institutional capacity of the relevant ministries to support domestic resource mobilization, help with the public expenditure, the debt management. But then we also are working directly with the financial sector, notably building the capacity of the central bank and the Somali Development and Reconstruction Bank. So this is really key. You need to build institutions. Without institutions, a country can never really be in the driver's seat. And this is also, I think, for us, and where we are looking at doing things differently compared to the past, is then in understanding where are the humanitarian actors active, where are the peace building actors active, and how can we achieve synergies? Because the reality is that for decades you have had humanitarian resource flows averaging between 10 to 20% of GDP annually in the country, but not really being programmed with a long-term view. And yet, they will stay active there. So we need to therefore work with these actors that have the capacity to start delivering really then on the front lines where then stabilization is also required. This is, I think, where we heard like the early support to livelihoods, even environments that are slightly insecure. These are the actors that can deliver the support, and we need to work strategically with them. And this is also why we have now signed a memoranda of understanding, for instance, with the International Committee of the Red Cross, also with Interpeace, so that we have strategic partnerships there. Now, just in closing at this stage, I want to say that I think we also need to really look at the role of technology, because institution building, we need to continue to innovate around that. There are lots of capacity weaknesses, and many relate to administrative processes, which delay impact. Often when it comes to financial management and procurement aspects. And I think here, similarly to the planning of investments made by humanitarian development peacebuilding partners, technology can help us connect some dots and really support our ambitions to build effective institutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Fred. And I think key messages in your intervention. Partnership was very key, and you gave examples of the important partnerships through which the bank is working on, and they're very interesting and very innovative, actually. And I think this goes to the credit of the bank, and also the bank's emphasis on institution building and its support to that. I think is very much to be commended, and it's really also ahead of its time. I think it was in terms of the involvement in tackling, some of the root causes of fragility in conflict-affected settings, and I think that these are all very important and innovative features regarding the work of the bank, and of course the nexus approach that we have championed in the Aswan Forum. I think you give also very good examples on how the bank is attentive to that in a context like Somalia, and it's very important. Let me now move to Dr. Adnan Abdou Ahmed. He is the East Africa Regional Coordinator of PineCop and co-founder of Hajj Youth Organization. And I think we're very keen to have a youth perspective in this session. There's a very active young group community of and we have been also interacting with them, of peace builders in Somalia, of environmental activists. There's a very active civil society in Somalia, including many young people, and we have engaged with some of them in the Aswan Forum, and we're happy also to on this occasion also reach out to you, Adnan, and thank you for joining us. And if you can help us, put a spotlight on how youth engagement in some of these efforts that we have heard is important, and how do you feel that it is being addressed under the efforts by the different partners, and also some of the initiatives you are having to maybe also mobilize young people around reconciliation and peace building. Over to you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Abdelatif, and the team at the CCCB for inviting me to this panel of experts. I'm really honored. To start with a brief background of the situation of young people in Somalia culturally. The young people in Somalia have been one of the worst afflicted groups to suffer intergenerational dialogue, intergenerational historical exclusion. I mean, participation of young people in decision making has been challenging due to issues related to clan and cultural affiliations. Gender has been also a factor, age as well, and also illiteracy. And also there is other factors that include the prominence of elders in political system. Exclusion creates frustration and demoralization among many young people. It limits capabilities and opportunities, and also constricts the contributions of youth to peace building and development in Somalia. It also had forced many young people to embark on very dangerous journey across borders searching for a better life. Those that also stay behind are very endangered by radicalism ideas and other extremist ideology. So in Somalia, mostly the male youth is in the age group between 16 to 30 have been observed as the main protagonists of criminal and political violences. Youth are viewed as vulnerable, powerless, and in need of protection. And on the other hand, they are feared as dangerous, violent, apathetic, and also as threats to security. So it's again is this background that culturally in the Somali context, as a personal experience, when I was a young person, when I used to hear the term peace builder, we call it Nabadon in Somali. I grew up with this ideology that only elders can be a peace builder, and I usually thought that the wisdom to participate peace processes comes as you get old. It is in the roots of our Somali culture and uprising that whenever we mention a peace builder, the mental image that comes to every Somali person is an elder person. And that is the typical Somali understanding of what it takes to be a peace builder. So it's again is this background that we have established Hage Youth Organization. Hage is a Somali word which means guide. So we have Hage established here in Somalia, and we basically implement the UN Security Council resolutions on youth, peace, and security, as well as other international instruments that promote meaningful youth participation in peace processes. We have also done so much work in translating and facilitating the knowledge of the continental instruments such as the African Youth Charter and also the African Union Continental Framework on Youth, Peace, and Security. And it is a 10-year implementation plan, which I was myself was part of the young people that were selected to contribute to the Continental Framework in 2019 in Asmara, Eritrea. We also have a link with continental youth networks that are based in our continent, Africa, and we try to facilitate knowledge sharing and information with Somali youth. Basically, at our organization, we facilitate dialogue and advocacy and also intergenerational dialogue, because we know that in most African countries or in Somalia, our leaders are above the age of 60, and the majority of young people in Somalia are below the age of 30. So there is almost 30 years of gap between these two important generations. So what we try is to facilitate a culture of understanding among these two generations. We invite elders, peace builders, and we also invite young people, and we facilitate dialogue. Young people share their experiences and knowledge and capacity, while also the elders share their experiences through their journey of becoming as an important part of the community. So one of the main important things that we do as part of post-construction, conflict reconstruction, is that we facilitate dialogue. We have also created a sense of ownership among many young people in Somalia. Currently, there are many young youth-led organizations in Somalia, and they don't understand the concept of peace. So they think that it is something very big to participate. So we try to narrow that definition of who is a peace builder. We invite them and we build their capacities in line with the Continental Framework and UN Security Council Resolution 2250. So, for example, a youth organization that is making an end to gender-based violence is also a peace builder organization. So, but they don't know that their actual work is a peace building work, or the peace builders work. So we try to facilitate this type of knowledge, that every person, peace building or peace builder is not something or a credit that you need to get from someone. It is something that you can get. You can be a peace builder as long as you are into your community and making an impact to the challenges that our societies face. So I'm also a member of the African Union Youth Peace and Security Program, the Continental Program, and I have been to countless capacity building programs and youth consultations at a continental level and also regional level. So when I come back to Somalia, every time I try to reach out and advocate for the signing and ratification of the African Youth Charter. Somalia still remains one of the 2 countries that did not still sign the African Youth Charter, and I'm very happy that Mrs. Hodan is also here with us as a policy advisor for our president. So we always try reach out to our decision makers in terms of promoting youth-led initiatives, like including the African Youth Charter and many other international instruments, and to pave a way for a national action plan on youth peace and security. So the concept of youth peace and security in Somalia is very limited. And that's what we are doing to facilitate and bring on board a lot of young people into this sector. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and then thank you, and great to see these youth-led initiatives in Somalia, and through the work you're doing and the engagement with youth around peace and security issues, reconciliation, explaining what is peace, how to have an impact, how to also make youth voices heard to elders, in Somali societies, in all our societies, who play an important role. So thank you for putting a spotlight on that, and also noted on the African Youth Charter. I want to go back to Hodan to react a bit to what you have heard, and to my question. Hodan, in your intervention at the beginning, you talked about the progress made, and some of the efforts and the positive narrative. And I asked you about sustainability of efforts, right? We often see that things are made and then they relapse. If there is a security backsliding, etc. How do you deal with that? This is my first question, and then my second one. I mean, what are partners? Partners are doing many good things and many valuable, important things we've heard. But from what in these peace building efforts is missing, or what could be done? See that is missing from the interventions we have heard, or should be done differently from a Somali perspective. If there's one issue you would like to highlight, so I would love to hear you on these 2 issues, then we'll ask others to react to that. Thank you.
Okay, sure. Thank you very much. I guess I want to start by saying that peace building and conflict resolution is very much part of the Somali DNA. And I say that because it's a society that's got pastoral roots, where sharing resources is really critical to life or death. So there is an indigenous and an internal process for the peace building. I think the 20 plus years of dictatorship and then followed by the internal conflicts did test that heavily, but I think for the most part, they're still there. What I would like to see, I think you talked about how do you address when there is backsliding. I think we need to recognize that progress is not going to be linear. There will be times when there's a bit of backsliding here or there. But I think there's a rich vein of lessons learned around peace building in Somalia for the last 30 years. And as somebody who's been part of that process in one way or another for almost 20 years, I want to say that what I think now in 2024, what we need to see is a shift from peace building that tends to support local level reconciliation processes, this community and that community, supporting them to sit under a tree and talk or go through their issues. I think we need to see a shift where they're starting to have processes that are very much driven by local and anchored in local authorities and the government. Because now if this isn't 2014 or 2004, you have government structures at various levels. Yes, they're weak in certain levels, and where they're weak, that's where we need to start to have a real sort of political dialogue and discussions to start to build the local governance. But what I'd like to see is sort of less of the ADR, alternative dispute resolution, and more of support to rule of law, support to the structures of formal rule of law processes, so they can extend beyond the cities to the rural areas. Because when you get down to it, the root causes of a lot of the local level conflict is around resources, it's around land, it's around animals, or it's around lack of justice, a perception that the person who was behind a certain crime or a community has not sufficiently brought that person to justice. So you really need to start thinking about how you build rule of law and the structures around it that can help from turning what could be a spark into something much larger. Secondly, a lot of agreements require a strong, sustainable post-agreement plan. So that if you're enforcing agreements between certain communities, you need to ensure that there's both political, policy level commitments to ensure that happens. And then I think also that, and I'm glad to see Dr. Adnan there, because youth are a really big component. I mean, it is true. It's even visible if you're walking around Mogadishu or Hargeisa or any of the cities, you can visibly see everybody around you is under the age of 25. And the youth, ultimately, I mean, there was a study that was done at USAID when I was there, and it actually showed that when you look at youth, there's actually less of a correlation between youth unemployment and extremism, but there's a more clear correlation between youth unemployment and conflict and violence. And so really, fundamentally, we need to be able to look at the youth and provide them with a viable livelihoods. And that gets back to what we were talking about earlier, which is ensuring that you have systems and structures and investments in capacity of government, but also investing in the private sector, investing in viable economic opportunities, because ultimately those are the underpinning of a relatively peaceful and stable society, is one in which you can be able to provide everybody with a stake in peace. And I think as long as you can do that, then I think that will, and Somalia already has them. I talked about some of the advancements in terms of the security gains, but what I didn't talk about is the fact that we are now a member of the East African Community, which means that Somalia now has access to a market in parts of Central and East and Central Africa. Somalia is now going to be on the UN Security Council come January 2025. And I think that there is lots of opportunity if we're able to invest in youth, invest in the economy, and invest in real, genuine institutional building. I think you'll start to see even more robust growth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Adan. Extremely useful, and thank you for pointing to the Security Council membership of Somalia coming up. Looking forward to that, and I think it'll be having a country that's been gone through such a conflict, and in the international body dealing with conflicts and peace and security. I think this is something that bringing that voice there, I think is something that many look forward to. And then thank you for pointing very precise examples where you want to see bigger effort being made, particularly in strengthening local governance, rule of law. And I have to say also, I mean, it's important for us because we again tend to focus a lot on national processes, national-led efforts, etc., and not sufficiently how at the very local level, once you have institutions like now you have in Somalia, how they can be massively strengthened to address some of the issues of resources you mentioned. So that is extremely useful. I saw Dragan was nodding, hearing you. So I wonder if you want to react to that, and also maybe Fred. We mentioning about one of the things that we found striking in Somalia and Batadan is a lot of these youth initiatives are very really reflect a very vital, a very dynamic civil society, and they always raise the issue of the funding for these initiatives, including by institutions like the AFDB and other institutions. So I wonder how do you address some of that in your plans, to support the resilience in the civil society in some of these aspects. So give and also ask if anyone attending the webinar would like to raise their hands for asking questions. We would welcome that in the 15 minutes we have left. So maybe Dragan, over to you, and then Fred, and also the Bakisu, if you want to react on the local governance, also on the aspect that was mentioned. Dragan.
Your Excellency, thank you very much. I will be extremely brief, and I'm super glad that Hodan actually mentioned and I believe destroyed this stereotype that actually community conflicts are identity conflicts. They are not. 70+% of conflicts at the community level are related to resources. And this is actually of extreme importance, particularly when we look from the perspective of institution building, first starting from these policy frameworks and actually federalism, structural federalism and constitutional reform, ensuring that actually we have a jurisdictional clarity, who is responsible to initiate or address certain issues or actually resolve certain issues. So actually, also, Your Excellency, when you mentioned this newly established governmental structure, this it's also that's why I was happy that Hodan mentioned this kind of conflict dynamic at the community level, in which way one institution can be actually empowered to react and engage in resolving issues. First, of course, to connect and clarify institutional responsibilities and jurisdictions, but of course also to enter into the institutions, be it at the be it at the central level, federal member states, or the local level. First, I'm glad actually that Frederick mentioned administrative management, financial management, procurement, but also human resources management. So all these elements are part of the overall UN engagement. We still do not call it a kind of public reform strategy, of course, that should be totally Somali-led, but from some, how can I say, quasi-public reform management strategy, we actually go into the institutions, providing support in all these areas through certain implementation methodology. I will not bother you with this birdie language from the UN, but basically through certain contractual arrangements with different institutions that we are supporting from the central level to the local level. So we as UN, we engage with institutions and basically start supporting institutions to build from itself, to be capable to address issues with regards to the jurisdiction. So also it's from the long-term sustainability perspective, it is actually very important, this transition from the national development to national transformation plan, and also learning from different experiences. Somalia chose to learn particularly from Malaysian experience and actually building different labs, that these labs actually will support transformation process and engage and embrace private sector into the processes in order actually to have more sustainable and more like public-private partnership in certain areas, which will at the same time then support rule of law approach and more like engagement at the community level. I will stop here. Over to you, Your Excellency. Your Excellency, you are muted. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Fred, I think we've heard, thank you, Dragan, that was very informative. Fred, there's a lot of expectations around in the next phase of Somalia for AFDB. We've heard clearly there have gains that have been made, and we need to move to transformation, as Dragan mentioned, consolidating these gains, particularly at the local level. So there's a lot of a high level of ambition, I think, for the bank on Somalia, also bearing in mind also the lot of keenness of more generally of to support Somalia from the international community in the African Union, and so how to raise to that level of ambition, and in particularly with regard to your new country paper, and bearing also in mind again very dynamic civil society, as we heard, with youth involvement. Over to you, Fred.
Yeah, thank you, Ahmed. Now, just on the issue of youth initiatives and civil society, I think this is really an area where we need to still do a lot of work, because the majority of these type of organizations, their funding requirements are typically around maybe $5,000 a year. So these are very small. It's very small for institutions like ours to reach them, and yet they are so critical to build up that that resilience from the bottom. And so there again, the solution can only be one where you manage to establish effective partnerships with different entities. And this is why we have launched during our Africa Resilience Forum last year the Investing and Partnering with the Youth for Peace initiative. And this is done together with the UN Peacebuilding Support Office, UNICEF, Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation, and some more partners, where we really want to look at what is it that we can do from our different angles there to simply invest more in youth. No,
we have a countdown, so we need to wrap up. Yes. But I think you answered my question very well. I want to give then the final words to Lebakiso, African Union, and to Adnan for final also comments. And again, I think it has been very enriching for us to listen to all these views. They will inform our own engagements in Somalia coming up in terms of capacity building. And again, appreciation to all our partners of the ASWAN Forum, and particularly AFDB, UNDP, and others who have been supporting this effort. Lebakiso and then Adnan. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I think one of the important concluding remarks from me is that as the PCRD Center, we are going to host, in collaboration with the CCCPA as well as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Government of Egypt, and African Union, the PCRD Awareness Week, which is a really great opportunity and platform for promoting conflict, for promoting and prevention conflict, as well as promoting peace building. But I also want to say that it is an opportunity to bring collaborative and joint efforts with other stakeholders, such as the civil society organizations. And for that matter, Somalia is one of priority countries that we are going to launch our activities. I thank you.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to that. Adnan, you heard some of the responses in terms of engaging youth.
Yes, thank you so much, Ambassador. My final remark is that we need a meaningful representation of young people in Somalia when it comes to African Union mission in Somalia, the former AMISOM, ATMIS, and then this new mission. I think there's very limited involvement of young people. It's always between military and decision making. So we need an actual representation of young people. For example, appointing a youth peace ambassador for this kind of peace building missions in Somalia, and also at UN level, because we actually have to engage the UN Security Council resolutions on youth, peace and security, and also the African Union level. So we need meaningful representation, and you will always take our message in terms of advocating for young people in meaningful participation of peace and security in Somalia's post-conflict reconciliation. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you. And I think this idea of a youth ambassadors, Somali youth ambassadors working with the AU mission, I think it's a very interesting idea. And again, I'm always impressed to see the energy, the enthusiasm of youth in Somalia to engage with these efforts and to be supportive of them. So thank you, and look forward to continue engaging with you and the good work you are doing in Somalia. Again, I want to thank all our distinguished speakers. We are this part of our long-term engagement with us of our center and of the ASWAN Forum with Somalia, and we hope to build on that again in preparing for the forum next year and other engagements, including at the UN, in the context of the UN peacebuilding architecture, in the context of the PCR Awareness Week, the context also of the Summit of the Future coming up, which will discuss a lot also peacebuilding and conflict prevention. And again, Somalia remains critical for these efforts and to advance that agenda in Somalia. Thank you very much again for joining us, and thank you for PeaceCon for having us this year and bringing this African perspective.